It's the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host, David Feldman. Hello, David.
Hello, good morning.
And the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello. We have a very good invitation for our listeners.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that, Ralph. There's, we've invited our listeners to write to their congresspeople, and it appears that they're not getting a lot of traction. They're not getting a lot of response. And we want to see if we can pool our efforts. And in that vein, you wanted to start a club. Tell us about that, Ralph.
Yeah, this is an informal Congress club, which we have an application form for our listeners who are really serious and are willing to spend a few hours a month to do what individually they haven't been able to do, which is to get their senators and representatives to respond to voters back home who want them to take a stand on corporate crime and restoring taxes on the super rich and the global tax corporations who've learned how to escape paying not just their fair share of taxes. Some of them don't pay any federal income tax at all, or 2-3%. So the way it's going to work, Steve and David, is there'll be an application form on our website, nader.org, and people can fill it out, just simple questions. We are not going to initiate this club until the first 100 people join from around the country. We want to show people that once you force members of Congress to take a stand, are you going to be soft on corporate crime? Are you going to let the rich and the corporate escape taxation and not be able to fund all the human and material infrastructure that's streaming out and fund it so it isn't a greater deficit on our children and grandchildren? We can force them to take stands. The press doesn't ask them these letters, substance. And the letters are very, very acutely written, so they can't just, send you back a form letter. A form letter means that they're rejecting the kind of changes and reforms you're proposing that are long overdue and supported by a vast majority of the American people, conservative, liberal, and the polls again have said people want the super rich and the big corporations to pay taxes like other people do, and they want a law and order crackdown on corporate crime against consumers, workers, communities, all of the way they rip off the federal government, in healthcare, military contracting, etc. So you'll be able to read, listeners, the two letters and fill out the form. And in order to give our listeners confidence that this is going to work, it doesn't start until the first 100 applications are turned in.
All right, very good. So we will put a button on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website that will direct you to probably nader.org, and then you click on Write Congress, and that's where the application will be. Fill out. When we get to 100, then we'll really start the work in earnest.
Right, because once you get a response, one way or another, from your two senators and representatives, then you'll send us these responses, and the citizen groups in Washington who don't have the leverage that you do because you're back home and you can increase your numbers and demands, we'll put those answers to work. We'll see who the allies are, get congressional hearings, get mass media on it, and get things moving. So it's in your hands, as I've said again and again, and it's your Congress, people. Remember that. You've given them the sovereign power, and you can demand that they use it in your public interest, not in the interest of 1,500 giant corporations.
All right, very good. That's what we'll do. We'll put that button on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website, and we'll start taking applications for the club. We have a great show for you today, as usual, and we're going to start by talking about the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party seems to have a knack for keeping its grassroots movements at arm's length. The Republican Party pays attention to its activists, it seems. When the right gets mad, the party embraces that outrage, and they're rewarded with electoral gains. Why haven't the Democrats been able to harness the enthusiasm of their young activists? The left isn't any less passionate than the far right. The left isn't any less organized than the far right. The left doesn't like brain power or manpower or charismatic candidates. So what have the Democrats done with that talent and enthusiasm? Well, not much. What are they doing wrong? That's what we'll be asking our first guest, Professor Dana Fisher, whose book Activism Inc. studied how young activists on the left have been discouraged from breaking through the party infrastructure. Her latest book, American Resistance From the Women's March to the Blue Wave, explores the explosion of mobilizing on the left that followed Donald Trump's 2016 victory. Has the Democratic Party learned anything in between? What has the Democratic Party establishment done with that energy? That's the first half of the show. In the second half of the show, we're going to talk about trucking safety. Commercial trucks are big, they're heavy, they're fast, they're more difficult to control than passenger cars, and their drivers are often overworked, fatigued, and pressured to prioritize productivity over safety. Our second guest, Jennifer Tierney, is an advocate for the Truck Safety Coalition. She'll be joining us to share some updates on her work pushing for stronger regulations that would reduce the number of injuries and fatalities caused by truck-related crashes. As always, we'll take a break in between to check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, why haven't the Democrats been able to harness the enthusiasm of their most energetic members? David?
Dana Fisher is a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland. Her books include American Resistance and Activism Inc., How the Outsourcing of Grassroots Campaigns is Strangling Progressive Politics in America. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Professor Dana Fisher.
Thanks so much, David.
Yeah, welcome, Dana. I first met Dana when she was a student at Princeton University, and she's never stopped being a student and scholar on democratic movement, small d. In your book, Activism Inc., you focused on problems that progressive citizen groups, especially the national citizen groups, have been having because they were increasing outsourcing their fundraising and other activities to professional consulting groups. And these groups didn't take this book that kindly, but I thought you made a very powerful point. And to this day, when I get letters from the various progressive groups, I can tell right away they're written by consultants. They're very scripted. They don't have the emotional urgency that a letter written by the people in the various groups would have communicated to their members, and they're paying a price. You want to describe that whole thesis of yours?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ralph. It's great to chat with you. So the basic argument that I talked about in Activism Inc. was I laid out the ways that progressive politics have used outsourcing as a model to increase their base on the one hand, but decrease the engagement of everyday citizens into activism and progressive politics. Because basically, everyday citizens were turned into basically financiers, and they just wrote checks, maybe wrote a letter every once in a while. And that was all that citizens were being expected to do as part of engagement in democracy, which is obviously extremely problematic. And I talk about how this outsourcing didn't just disentangle or disconnect citizens themselves from the act of engaging in politics, but it also had a really unintended negative consequence on the young people who were doing the activism as we define it here, which is basically doing this kind of fundraising and membership engagement, because they were used and treated very much as replaceable cogs in this system of activism on the left. And it was extremely problematic, as I documented in the book.
Well, clearly, one of the prices that these groups pay is they don't have well-organized people back home to put the pressure on the federal government that they are urging them to. And the big environmental groups, for example, like NRDC and the Environmental Defense and others, you know, they can do a lot of litigation. They can have their own people lobbying in Washington, but they really can't call on a powerful group the way the NRA does or AIPAC does back home. Lois Gibbs, on the other hand, who runs a group opposed to toxic contamination in communities, does have grassroots efforts, but she doesn't have a huge budget. But she gets a lot done with, say, $1 million a year budget or so. Public citizens letters are written by consultants. Common cause letters are written by consultants. You know, they are very smooth and persuasive, and it is a pain in the neck to have to write these letters if you're engaged in action by these groups. So it's just easier to farm it out. But as a result, members of Congress know full well that while the arguments of these groups are persuasive and occasional meetings with these groups' representatives are persuasive, there isn't that much power back home. And even though your book came out years ago, in my experience, it's just getting worse. I mean, there's more and more bureaucracy, farming it out, commodifying the process. And how do you see a way out here?
Well, I mean, I just would just start by saying that I think you're absolutely right, Ralph. I think that one of the things that I document in my newer book, American Resistance, is the way that activists on the left rose up outside of this democratic infrastructure, which extended to a lot of these civic groups. And that happened in a lot of ways because there was this backlash to obviously Donald Trump being elected president, but also the way that the left was doing politics and this grassroots model that basically was an outsourced model. So the left rose up. And one thing that's really notable here that I talk about in American Resistance is how many new organizations basically were formed to fill this infrastructural void we saw on the left that connected with grassroots people in communities across the country. The problem is that even those groups started to work to focus more online. And I think part of that was exacerbated for sure by the COVID pandemic. And as a result, people didn't want to meet in person. So even the types of work and engagement that I noted and write about in American Resistance, we see moved online, and channeling people online means focusing a lot more on what we call mobilizing, which is, short-term engagement in actions that are not relational and don't involve real human-to-human contact. And when they don't involve human-to-human contact, it's a lot harder to build real local infrastructure. And that's what progressive politics needs right now. So when you ask me what we can do to address these issues, I mean, we see a lot more infrastructure that exists on the ground between campaigns and between elections on the right than we do on the left. And one way to combat that is to build these kind of relational politics that involve humans contacting humans and working together.
Yeah, it translates into the way the two parties, the major parties, the Republican Democratic parties, operate in election time. For example, it's widely recognized that in the crucial state of Ohio in 2004, when John Kerry was running against George W. Bush of the infamous criminal invasion of Iraq, the Democrats brought in outsiders to try to get out the vote. And the Republicans had people in the neighborhoods knocking on doors and trying to get out the vote. And Kerry lost the state by maybe 70,000 votes, very, very close election. Some people think that there was voter suppression at the end and that Kerry actually was robbed. But that turned the whole election, spun because the Electoral College, spun the election, reelected Bush and Cheney. And they're still doing it. They're still bringing outsiders in Pennsylvania in the last election. People who are on the ground would tell me the Republicans work with people who live in these areas. They're influentials in these areas. And the Democrats, who are rolling in campaign money, maybe that was their Achilles heel. If they didn't have that much money, they might have to depend on local people. They brought in professionals, not exactly connecting with people, the pulse of the people, the sense of what's urgent and what they want to hear from their candidates. Well, the Democrats pulled out Pennsylvania, but it was a pretty close call. I mean, if there was 100,000 vote switch in 4 closed states in November 2020, Trump would have been reelected. So this is very perilous both for the Democratic Party and for the impact of citizen groups. How would you characterize, just moving from the citizen community, the parties in this effort of grassroots mobilization? What's the situation now?
Well, what I would say is that we've seen what I think of as a homogenization of the way that grassroots efforts are run on the left. Some of that is due to digital technologies through the different ways that people use electronic lists, the different ways that you can use technology to mobilize people to participate in actions where you're no longer mobilizing friends, neighbors, and people who are co-members of local organizations, local PTAs. Instead, basically, strangers are getting mobilized to work together. So even when these people are locals, they're locals who don't know one another. And that's a huge problem, which we do not see on the right. Instead, a lot of the infrastructure on the right builds into pre-existing social ties that come from guns rights groups. Recently, we can see these anti-critical race groups that are staging protests against school boards across the country, and we're going to probably see a lot more of them. But we see these locally embedded groups that are mobilizing on the right and building on the pre-existing infrastructure. When you start after each election with a clear slate where you leave behind, the Democratic Party leaves behind no lasting infrastructure, no real social connections, no real social ties, and you're starting from scratch, sure, it makes sense to bring in strangers or mobilize whoever signed up for your list who comes from, maybe even bringing in people from districts nearby, which is something that I've done in the most recent elections because I was asked to. But that does not work the same way as friends and neighbors getting involved.
Your point is well made in the races in South Carolina and Kentucky in November 2020. The Democratic candidate for the Senate against Lindsey Graham, Jamie Harrison, who's now head of the Democratic National Committee and is not returning calls, although he promised to, he had about $80 million. And what do you do with $80 million? Well, the consultants to the campaign say, put it on television. They get 15% of the take. So they have a bias to go the television ad game, which irritates people because it's so overwhelming and repeated again day after day, while the Republicans have more of a ground game. They do put TV ads, of course, but they have more of a ground game. And the same in Kentucky. Huge ads for Miss McGrath, who was running against McConnell, and she lost big time, even though she had about $70 million. These are unheard of sums, as you know, Dana, for small states like that. They're unheard of sums for big states, too. But when do you think the Democrats are going to learn? They're not going to learn it from the AFL-CIO because they're into the email game, too. You ask some of the people, well, what have you done on this issue? And they say, well, we've sent a whole bunch of emails. I said, emails? When was the last time a labor leader addressed a mass labor gathering the way they did in the 30s, 40s, and 50s? And they've lost touch, and that's why a third of the AFL-CIO workers voted for Trump. And because it was a big block for Trump, it inhibited the AFL-CIO leadership in Washington from really going after Trump. They would tell me they didn't want to alienate the Trump voters. It had that vicious circle, and that occurred at the highest levels of the big national unions as well. What do you see being done to turn this around? Because these groups that we're talking about, Dana, we're talking with Dana Fisher, who's a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland and director of the Program for Society and the Environment. They're not susceptible to introspection. They don't like to take any commentary, even though it's designed to make them stronger.
I know. I mean, this is a huge issue, Ralph, and you and I have had actually conversations about this many times over the years. Unfortunately, the criticism is not well received, and what ends up happening instead is we see these new organizations that emerge to try to fill the void. And obviously, when you're dealing with new organizations, you have to start all over with building infrastructure rather than building on pre-existing organizations that aren't just mobilizing people, but they're actually engaging them in long-term politics. And that's something we just don't see on the left. And so one of the challenges, and I think one of the problems that we saw in the most recent cycle was the fact that all of these people on the left got a lot of energy and enthusiasm from non-local people, right? So we saw, you mentioned 2 races where tons of money came in from out of state. And those people basically paid for a bunch of wasted time on TV. I mean, the other question that we really need to ask ourselves is who's watching TV ads anymore, because you're only hitting a specific demographic, which is very, very helpful to people on the right because the voters tend to be older and are more likely to watch TV, particularly certain television stations, as I'm sure you know. But on the left, if you're trying to mobilize young people, you are not investing in TV ads for sure.
Well, how about these new groups that are formed in the wake of Bernie Sanders' 2016, 2020 efforts, Our Revolution, and others that have emerged? Are they doing the grassroots effort, or have they been more prone to follow the same outsourcing?
No, some of these groups have actually really embedded themselves in communities. Our Revolution has done some of this, but I think the one that comes to mind the most is Sunrise, which is very much connected with Representative Ocasio-Cortez. And what we basically see is these groups, Sunrise has hubs all over the country of local folks, mostly young people, who have gotten involved. They originally got involved around the issue of climate change, but they have worked on a whole series of issues at this point, including COVID relief, including a Green New Deal, obviously. But they actually have come out and helped people in local communities where they actually are bringing out local people to do that work. And one of the things that I think is really remarkable about the way that Sunrise works is they have these hubs that are locally embedded. Now, they're young people who are involved here. And so one of the things I learned from a small study I did around this group is that even when these young people are in the same communities, they do most of their meetings online. So I wanted to go and attend one of the meetings and check it out. And they said that everything's done online because that's how they do stuff. But what's interesting is they start out online, but then they actually do actions, including, registering voters or helping support COVID relief and making sure people know about getting vaccinated, for example. They do that in local communities and they mobilize local people to do that. And they work with groups that are from the community. So they're not just parachuting in as we've seen other left-leaning groups. I would just say, Ralph, I think that here, this really brings us back to this distinction between citizens who I think are extremely concerned on the left and have become increasingly more engaged, as I document in American Resistance, but they've been focusing much more on this idea of mobilizing around specific events or a specific issue rather than organizing long term. And as a result, they're not actually continuing to pay attention to and hold their elected officials accountable. If you only mobilize every once in a while around an issue in an election, the elected official is not recognizing that they have to actually pay attention and they're beholden to their constituents. I mean, they know they are to some degree, but if you have these constant reminder from, people who represent more, well-financed interests in certain congressional areas, for example, they're going to get a lot more attention, which is one of the reasons that citizens need to be organized, not just mobilized.
You make a good point, Dana. The mobilization has to have a laser point. It can't have all these demonstrations and marches and all the human energy go up into the ether. It's got to be directed to the various decision makers, whether it's the city council or the state legislature or the Congress, by name. They should carry the banners and the names of the legislators they want to adopt their reforms. And that will really get the attention of the lawmakers. Otherwise, it's just like an anonymous march, and you're not going all the way to the people who can make the decision that you want made.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things I talk about in American Resistance is the fact that marching on a Saturday or, on a weekend day in general ends up leaving out a lot of people who may be working and not able to participate. I found that the work of these protests is really one about collective identity formation, where people come out and they get to feel like they're not alone. Take, for example, the first Women's March as a great example, or the March for Our Lives that happened more recently. But what happens after that is the part where the organizing comes in. And that's where the people who took time on a weekend to march in the streets have to redirect their energies into actually pushing for social and political change. And that's exactly where they should be targeting elected officials. And it shouldn't just be at the national level. It should go all the way down to local communities. Because as we know, all politics is really locally embedded.
And there's got to be a demand for responding by these citizen groups. It's important to even get your legislators to keep having to say no. You invite them to meetings. You invite them to the rallies. Keep having them say no. The more they say no, the more actually they start rethinking their role. Like some of these citizen groups will start taking it personally. It's interesting that the most powerful lobbies don't have to rely on marches and demonstrations. You don't have Wall Street rely on. They do in personam lobbying with their senators, representatives, whining, dining, campaign money, offering jobs after they retire, et cetera, et cetera. And the same is true for citizen lobbies like AIPAC and NRA. They don't really have to have marches and demonstrations because they focus laser-like on their senators and representatives, find out who their friends are, who they're beholden to, what they need, etc. Dana, there's a real need to increase the competence the vision, the expectation of these citizen groups, and even if they're organized, but also the ones that are ad hoc, they need help. And we've got to get over this generation divide because the younger organized people are not connecting with people who've been through it in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and they have a lot of assistance to extend, but not if there's no communication.
I absolutely agree. And I also have noted a lot that this change in the way that technology is used by people of different generations, as well as the way that they not only connect with one another, but they also aim to connect with their elected officials, matters a lot. And so by opening up communication across generations and thinking through the way that it works, there's lots to be learned. I mean, I would just say that, historically, the left has been known for its marches and its peaceful protests, right? I mean, think back to the first Earth Day in 1970, for example. But the question is whether those big protest events translate into activism and engagement long term around specific political issues. Because if they don't, it's just yelling into the void in some ways.
Baying at the moon. The 1970 Earth Day had 1,500 events all over the country, that they were linked to existing proposed legislation. And they were definitely responsible for the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. I mean, they built that grassroots pressure on members of Congress, and it's never happened like that since. I mean, I can't exaggerate the total arrogance and indifference of these entrenched members of Congress, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. There are a few exceptions, of course, but when they come from safe seats or safe states, they're colossally arrogant, and they don't like to have town meetings anymore. So they've discovered virtual town meetings. Now they don't even want to do virtual town meetings. We have almost 200 people in the Western District in Massachusetts. Richard Neal's been reelected 17 times, and he thinks, he doesn't have to worry about the constituents back home as long as he takes credit for some government contracts and grants and press releases. So we had almost 200 people say, look, we want to give you our input about tax reform. You're the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. We have huge power over you theoretically compared to other citizens in other states that don't have their representative chair of the tax writing House Ways and Means Committee. And he still hasn't responded to their request for a virtual town meeting, even though calls have been made. And these people really know their stuff. They're connected with the patriotic millionaires. They've studied about IRS deficient budgets. They've studied about uncollected corporate taxes. They've studied about getting rid of a lot of the tax loopholes. And so when they do the right thing by the book, contact your member of Congress, this is the experience that they are receiving day after day. And it's happening all over the country. And the press doesn't cover it. The press does not cover inaction. Inaction is action. But when you say to reporters from the New York Times or Post, Congress hasn't done anything on this, and they haven't done anything on that, they say, well, that's not news. Well, of course it's news.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Ralph. And I would just say this is one of the opportunities to take advantage of some of the ways that younger folks who have come up in this era of the internet and of distributed organizing have a lot to contribute here. Because if we just think about the ways that individuals can do what they call bird dogging of elected officials, or basically, using their own personal identity and their personal engagement as activists and get attention by promoting it over, through digital technologies, we can see how valuable it can be. I mean, there was great work done by the Town Hall Project to get a lot of attention to the people who wouldn't hold town hall meetings and wouldn't actually answer questions. And we see most recently, I just was reading about all of these anti-critical race activists who have been coming out, who are, right-leaning, who have been coming out to school board meetings across the country and are basically, taking pictures and causing trouble and posting it online and passing it around. And that becomes news once that happens. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. And I have to say that in most cases, younger people who are more comfortable with these technologies are the ones who do the best. We saw some really great work done by folks from Sunrise, who are mostly young people. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities to really shine some light on elected officials who aren't actually considering their constituents, who are the ones who elected them.
We've been talking with Dana Fisher, professor of sociology, University of Maryland, author of the Probing book, Activism Inc., and a more recent book from Columbia University Press, 2021, called American Resistance, From the Women's March to the Blue Wave. It's just one thing I want to urge our listeners to do. Okay, do you want to see for yourself how hard it is to get through and all the automated messages that you have to confront? Just call your senators and representatives. You can call the switchboard 202-225-3121. 202-225-3121. Just tell them the name of the senator or representative, and then watch the merry-go-round and get the sense that we're trying to convey personally by doing that. Steve and David?
Yeah, Professor Fisher, I wanted to ask a question, and the big question is why? The Democratic Party is not good at long-term organizing. Is it the nature of the issues? Is it money? Is it laziness? What do you think the reason is?
Historically, the left and the right garnered power from different places, right? So the right had embedded in it more corporate interests and more corporate resources, which was a built-in constituency. The left had labor and had these issues that became known as public interest issues, as Ralph has written about. And as a result, there's more diffuse power there. And over time, there has been this expectation that to maintain the diffuse power, you need to keep contact with people and keep them engaged. And so there was this push to use an outsourced model to keep people engaged and to keep bringing in resources to fund that engagement. Unfortunately, that basically led, as I talk about in Activism Inc., to this outsourced model, because it's a really good way of garnering resources, but it's not a really good way of creating power. Because, as we know, as much as money does equal power in some cases, it doesn't equal citizen power when you're talking about diffuse interests and diffuse strength of citizens.
That's a very important point, the use of this diffuse interest, because corporations have just the opposite. They are unified by the desire for profit, executive compensation, and they have extreme stamina behind that focused, laser-like pressure on Congress, where citizen groups come and go. They got other things on their mind. They're not bonded by that one monomaniacal desire for profit. And it's a very asymmetric impact on Congress that bears more research.
I think that's absolutely true. So what we see is these concentrated interests are able to focus, I think Ralph just said, in a laser-like fashion, exactly on specific issues and specific elected officials, because they have a lot of capacity there. And, civic groups don't have that kind of capacity because they're trying to represent the whole public's interest, of course.
Yeah, a good example of that is they have more full-time staff, obviously, than citizen groups, maybe 100 to 1 in Washington. They outnumber. The drug industry has about 450 full-time lobbyists on Congress. I don't count more than 8 full-time civic lobbyists dealing with pharmaceutical issues. So it's not just the power of big money and all the pressures incentives they can bring to bear on elected officials, but it's also they outnumber the staff enormously, and the budgets are not comparable. Well, we're out of time, Dana. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners before we conclude?
I would just add here that what I talk about in Activism Inc. is absolutely continuing today. We continue to see the outsourcing of progressive politics across a wide range of issues and across the left. And while we did see this American resistance rise up in response to the 2016 election, unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, I think a lot of the groups that came out of that period of time have moved so much online that there still is this infrastructural deficit that needs to be filled. And until it is, we're going to see, a constant struggle to move the needle and to get progressive outcomes that all of these people who are involved on the left want. I mean, we can see it right now if you just look at what's happening at the subnational level with these bills to limit, limit participation in our elections and to try to stop peaceful protests from happening.
Well, thank you very much. We've been talking with Professor Dana Fisher, professor of sociology at the University of Maryland, author of the probing book, Activism Inc., How the Outsourcing of Grassroots Campaigns is Strangling Progressive Politics in America. That came out in 2006, Stanford University Press, still very, very relevant. And her more recent book, just out, American Resistance from the Women's March to the Blue Wave. Thank you very much, Dana.
Thank you so much for having me, Ralph.
We've been speaking with Professor Dana Fisher. We will link to her work at ralphnaderradiohour.com. You know, we've all been intimidated by trucks barreling down the highway. Up next, we'll talk to someone who's trying to make those trucks a little less scary for us and for them. But first, let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, June 25, 2021. I'm Russell Mokhiber. There's a double standard in U.S. bribery law. Over the past decade, the Supreme Court has narrowly interpreted domestic bribery laws. This weakened application of the federal domestic bribery law now stands in stark contrast to the robust and expansive prosecutions of bribery under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which seeks to limit U.S. entities' ability to bribe foreign public officials. The result is that those who seek to improperly influence domestic public officials are often able to engage in behavior that looks and smells like bribery, but is not bribery. Similar behavior in the foreign context, however, is punished by the FCPA. That's the take of Stanford Law School's Anna Mance and Dinsha Mistry in a new law review article titled The Bribery Double Standard, Leveraging the Foreign Domestic Divide. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman and Ralph. When Ralph helped pass the seatbelt law in 1966, it was a simple engineering solution to a deadly safety problem. Our next guest is going to tell us about her work advocating for common sense engineering solutions to prevent fatalities involving trucks. And one in particular is pretty cheap and easy. David?
Jennifer Tierney is a truck safety advocate and serves on the board of Citizens for Reliable and Safe Highways. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Jennifer Tierney.
Thank you.
Jennifer, welcome indeed. I mean, this is not an issue just for people who look in their rearview mirror and see a big truck coming up on them. The crashes involving trucks have been increasing and fatalities have been increasing. And the scene now is in Congress, and the Senate is in a fight as to whether they're going to pass engineering safety standards for trucks that are long overdue, and whether they're going to include light trucks and not just the big, heavy trucks. Tell us what you think should go through Congress in terms of safety standards enforced by the Department of Transportation.
Well, I think that what we all would hope for is that we all could put ourselves in a position of thinking about ourselves or a loved one being involved in one of these crashes. And I can assure you that the volunteers, which our organization is made up almost 100% of volunteers, the Truck Safety Coalition, what we hear from members is that prior to this happening to them, you don't give a lot of thought about trucks. They're annoying, but you don't think about it until it happens to you. And these crashes are devastating. They kill, they maim, and they're devastating. And unfortunately, I'm having this conversation with you today because rather than Congress seizing on a ready opportunity to seriously reduce the toll of these traffic crashes, they are making decisions that are doing right the opposite. And these are things that could be your loved ones. Nobody thinks it's going to happen to them until it does.
These are way overdue. The trucking lobby's blocked action in Congress. This isn't far out engineering improvements. They're way overdue. Give us some examples, like automatic emergency braking.
Well, Congress only considers these major surface transportation bills every 5 years or so. So that's why right now the chance to advance vital safety improvements cannot be squandered. And one of the ones that was just so shocking to me was automatic emergency braking. It's a very highly effective system. Research by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety concluded that forward collision warning with automatic braking could prevent as much as 50% of front to rear crashes and 56% of front to rear car crashes and 41% of large truck front to rear crashes. And what they've done is in the largest of the trucks, which are a higher class of truck, they're promoting the use of automatic emergency braking. But these smaller box trucks that weigh between 10 to 26,000 pounds and represent 27% of all fatalities, they've decided not to require it in those trucks. This is shocking to me because these trucks now are they're on our local streets. They go through our neighborhoods. They're making millions of deliveries. They're picking up garbage. They're delivering supplies. And data shows that each year, on average, United Postal Service delivers 430 million pieces of mail. UPS and FedEx deliver 43 million packages. I can believe that because there's days when my neighborhood looks like a parking lot for FedEx or UPS. I mean, these trucks are all over our neighborhoods where our children are playing, our dogs run out, the school buses, people are walking. It's a very dangerous situation. And why would you not require it on those trucks that literally not only are they on our interstates, but they are literally where we live? This is very dangerous for all vulnerable road users. And the cost of one of these trucks, say a Class 6 truck, is approximately $90,000. The cost of automatic emergency braking is like $300. That's 0.3%. And Congress wants to take a chance on our children. Your child throws the ball in the road, runs to get it, and they're hit by one of these delivery trucks.
It really is. It's pretty shocking because a lot of the others are very inexpensive as well. I know in a letter that your colleagues sent to Senator Cantwell and Senator Wicker of the Committee on Commerce, Science, Transportation in the U.S. Senate just recently, June 9th, they list improvements like lane departure warning, blind spot detection on all new cars and trucks, mandating advanced impaired driving prevention technology, that's impaired driving, not just including alcohol, to end a persistent leading life taker, requiring technology to detect the presence of an unattended vehicle occupant, strengthening underride protections. That one goes back to 1966. I remember sitting in the Senate committee with Senator Magnuson, and they were discussing these horrendous decapitation crashes where, for a variety of reasons, a vehicle rear ends a truck because of differential braking, for example, and they go right under the truck, and people have been decapitated. And in Europe, they have these underride protections, but to this day, they haven't really required other than a flimsy one. Can you explain that?
No, the EU also has had automatic braking since 2015. So I haven't figured out why people in the EU's lives are more important to their members of their government than ours are to us. But underride's something that's obviously very near and dear to my heart. That's why I even became involved in this issue. My dad was killed in a side underride crash 37 years ago. And I'm still trying to get protection from underride along with others who've lost their loved ones or been injured this way. They're catastrophic, horrific crashes, and there are preventable and affordable ways to stop both rear and side underride crashes. Automatic emergency braking is part of it. A stronger rear underride guard. And now we have a protocol. It's been tested by IHS. We have a side underride guard that would prevent people from going under the side of these trucks. And what people need to realize is when you hit one of those trucks, the safety things in your car that protect you don't work in those kinds of crashes. The only thing between your head and the rear or the side of that truck is the windshield. They're horrific crashes. And it's industry pressure that keeps Congress from doing the right thing. And they keep succumbing to the pressure from industry to not put these things on there when they're affordable and it's preventable crashes. And until we speak up and fight back, which is what the Truck Safety Coalition does, it's not going to stop. It's beyond my comprehension that Congress does not do things that would save lives. It could be somebody they love one day.
Listeners might be saying, why don't they do that? They do it in Europe, put underride protections. Well, one of the reasons is they don't want to, when they unload the trucks, the truck owners, pushing for speed of unloading, they don't want to have to take the underride aside I mean, it's just ridiculous, the kind of supremacy of commercial convenience, a matter of seconds, and human life. As you say, you lost your father. And I think our listeners would like to know how you got into this and what you've been doing. We're talking with Jennifer Tierney of Crash. That's what the organization is called, that David spelled out. And before you talk about how you got into this, give our listeners the website so they can connect and join this fight.
Okay. The Truck Safety Coalition and Crash and PAT, we have been around for over 30 years now. And the Truck Safety Coalition is made up actually of Crash, which is Citizens for Reliable and Safe Highways, and also PAT, which is Parents Against Tired Truckers. And we have members of our organization from all over this country, and they are people whose lives have been directly affected by a truck crash. We have many, many people that lost loved ones, multiple loved ones, sometimes their whole family, to these kinds of crashes. And then we have individuals have lifelong serious injuries that they will never recover from, including very serious brain injuries. And so we are a nonprofit. The website is trucksafety.org. It is full of information for people who are just interested in the subject. Very much has a lot of information for those who have suffered a loss or an injury through this type of crash. And like I said, we are a nonprofit. We do take donations to help us to continue to do the work that we do. The board of directors of Crash and PAT both are almost by far majority made up of victims of these crashes, and we're all volunteers, and it's very near and dear to our heart. And we don't want to stop this fight. We don't understand why Congress is making decisions that benefit the industry versus saving lives, because I never thought this would happen to me. Nobody does, and then it does. And to think that there are people that have it within their capacity to do something to prevent these crashes, and it's an affordable fix, and they don't do it, it's hurt.
Well, as I understand the legislation, Jennifer, it's S 1386. The trucking industry has conceded some of the changes for the big trucks. Now the fight is whether the smaller trucks, and Congressman Hank Johnson in the House from Georgia is giving your group fits by not coming forward and including smaller trucks. Can you describe that situation?
Well, I think it's strictly a situation that the industry does not want to require that. And to put it in perspective of how important it is we had a member who lost a loved one in a crash, and when the truck was purchased, it was standard equipment to have automatic emergency braking, but the company buying the truck asked if they would take off that standard equipment to save a little bit of money, this $300. And this truck was in a crash that killed a child. So this is reality. This isn't just happening, in a far off place. This is happening here now, when the European Union already has automatic emergency braking. Why would you feel that these trucks that represent 27% of fatalities do not need to have automatic emergency braking? And they're promoting it for cars, you're promoting it for large trucks, but you're just going to rule out, all these trucks. And it's estimated that by not requiring this on trucks, you are eliminating as many as 500,000 trucks per year that will not be required to have this.
Let me read a sentence from this letter, June 9th letter by Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety, Center for Auto Safety, Consumer Federation of America, American Public Health Association, California Coalition for Children's Safety and Health. Here's a key sentence. Quote, at a time when many in the U.S. have become accustomed to e-commerce and next-day delivery, resulting in small and medium-sized commercial motor vehicles frequently driving through neighborhoods, this carve-out to accommodate segments of the trucking industry will imperil children, pedestrians, bicyclists, and other vulnerable road users and should be removed. We are attaching a list of the standalone safety and consumer protection bills which should be included in the reauthorization legislation. And so we don't have the time to go through each safety standard, but I take it this letter is on your website, isn't it?
Yes.
You want to give the website again?
It's trucksafety.org. trucksafety.org, trucksafety.org.
And it has examples of heart-rending tragedies, preventable tragedies. Half of families wiped out, and as you say, permanent disability, all because of the commercial greed and power of the trucking industry. You would think the insurance industry would be even tougher than it is, but they do have a group with consumers called Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. It does good work here in Washington. I wanted to ask you about your own personal entry into this following the loss of your dad, because leaders like you and Mothers Against Drunk Driving and others are really a very powerful force, because they never have to be motivated. They're already motivated by their tragedy and their determination to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. You've been all over the country. You've been testifying. Give us an idea of your actions.
Well, when my dad died in 1983, this was a man that had never had a ticket and never been involved in a wreck. And it was just so shocking that he would die that way. A truck driver had taken the truck home for him at work. It was a rural country road. He was backing it into a field beside his house at night. And so he was in a jackknife position in a curve. My dad came around the curve, hit the side of the trailer, went all the way under it, came out 41 feet on the other side. He lived for about 20 minutes, but he had such massive head injuries they could not get an airway established because of all the crushed bones in his face and neck. And we were just stunned that the driver did that. We were stunned that he was only required to have these 3 little lights that were not working. And so this started me off on a path to, like, how could he make that maneuver and it not be illegal? How did this happen? And why are there only these 3 little lights, and why were his lights not working? But one of the things that I did do that took quite a while to do, but we did get it accomplished, was reflective tape. Myself working with Crash is why we have reflective tape right now. That was one of the things that we knew would help with regards to the visibility of trucks at night or at dusk. And so conspicuity was a large part of that. So we got that passed. And at the time, because my dad's been dead for so long, we didn't have a lot of technology about underride guards. We had a rear guard. That was the first federal standard in 1953. Then they did, when the actress Jane Mansfield was killed in 1967, they did a little bit more of an upgrade, and they've done some upgrades. But the last one they did, the guard is woefully inadequate. So people are still hitting the rear and going under them. Well, IIHS tested a rear underride guard that could perform like it's supposed to, where the passenger compartment of the vehicle was not invaded by the back of the truck. So that was like a really big step in underride and preventing rear underride. And then the next step that happened, and IIHS tested a side underride guard at their facilities in Virginia, and the side underride guard performed like it was supposed to, that would stop cars from going under the side of these trucks. These are crashes that are incredibly hard to survive because of the nature of the passenger compartment being invaded by the trailer. And so that's what got me started. But in doing this, I also recognized there were a lot of things that were wrong that needed to be fixed besides underride. And so it's led me down a path of working on all these issues to promote highway safety with regard to large trucks. The difference in the weight and size of the truck versus a car makes these catastrophic injuries. And in fact, 96% of fatalities involving 2 vehicles, a truck and a car, are the passengers in the car. 96% are the passengers in the car. That's pretty horrific numbers, and I've been motivated by that.
Well, it does seem to be that Congressman Hank Johnson, who's on the Transportation Subcommittee in the House from Georgia, is a key person now. The trucking industry is lobbying him ferociously. And people, do your part. Call him up, leave a message. His number is 202-225-1605. That's area code 202, Washington, D.C. And it's 225-1605. 225-1605. Leave a message, regardless whether you're from Georgia or from his district in Decatur, anywhere around the country. These trucks, way overdue for regulation. They've been exempted from a lot of standards. There's always been a serious problem with truck braking for these giant semis. And this is the opportunity. It comes along every 5 years. Please do your part, listeners. Just take a couple minutes off, look at the website, and before we conclude, Jennifer, just give that website again.
It's trucksafety.org, and on there, I would encourage everyone in every state to call your members of Congress, and you can link to their phone numbers on our website, trucksafety.org.
And thank you very much, Jennifer. We've been
Thank
talking
you.
with Jennifer Tierney. She is a exceptionally effective civic advocate, just the kind of people we've been talking about in prior programs, making a difference out of a tragedy involving her dad and making a difference for all of us. And so thank you very much, Jennifer, for this.
We very much appreciate this opportunity. Everybody stay safe.
We've been speaking with Jennifer Tierney, board member of Citizens for Reliable and Safe Highways, otherwise known as CRASH. We will link to her work at ralphnaderradiohour.com. I want to thank our guests again, Professor Dana Fisher and Jennifer Tierney. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up. A transcript of this show will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website soon after the episode is posted.
Subscribe to us on our Ralph Nader Radio Hour YouTube channel. And for Ralph's weekly column, it's free. Go to nader.org. For more from Russell Mokhiber, go to corporatecrimereporter.com.
And go to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website and sign up for the Congress Club, where we're going to pool our efforts and get some action from Congress.
Ralph Nader wants you to support Whirlwind Wheelchair. They do great work showing people in the United States and around the world how to build sturdy, economical wheelchairs from local materials. Visit whirlwindwheelchair.org for more information.
And for an independent news source that believes people are more important than corporations, go to populist.com to read or subscribe to The Progressive Populist. If you email populist@usa.net or call 1-800-205-7067, they'll send you your first issue for free. That's 1-800-205-7067 for your first free issue of The Progressive Populist.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour when we'll welcome back our resident expert on Medicare for All, Dr. John Gaiman. Thank you, Ralph.
And thank you, everybody. And I believe Dr. John Gaiman is going to renew his offer of anyone who wants to send a book free to their senator or representative. We'll show you how to do it via Dr. John Gaiman's wonderful generosity.
Hi, this is Jimmy Leeward, producer of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, and welcome to the Wrap-Up, where we continue our conversations with Professor Dana Fisher and Jennifer Tierney. First up, Ralph and Dana Fisher talk about the unresponsive Congress.
There are other groups like Indivisible, like Jacobin, like Justice Democrats that have formed in the wake of Bernie Sanders' movement around the country, Dana. And when they were formed in 2016, 2017, we try to get hold of them, and we found there's a huge generational divide here. In other words, the citizen groups have been around a long time, like Public Citizen, U.S. PIRG, and Common Cause. They have a hard time connecting and giving the kind of experience and advice that's needed. And I found that indifference also among the squad. I mean, believe it or not, AOC and others who were elected as super progressives, it was almost impossible to meet with them. I went 2 times to AOC's office and sat with the staff and said, can I set up an appointment? And it never happened. And the same thing occurred with Ilhan Omar. I met with the chief of staff, then I came back again, and it never happened. Now, I know they got a lot on their mind, and they're being condemned and denounced and on the internet and all that. But if you're going to go into Congress as a progressive, it's a pretty good idea to connect with the citizen groups that have achieved so much in the past. I tell these members, you can't do it without these national citizen groups with all their members and all their expertise and litigation capabilities and lobbying, and we can't do it without you. And yet it's almost impossible to get a call returned, even from people you've known for years. Bernie Sanders hasn't returned my telephone call for 22 years. I finally got him in Vermont because I got his number, and he promised to have a Zoom meeting with the civic leaders here in Washington. And he said, my office will set up a time, and that was weeks ago, and we still don't have a time. So if we have a constitutional right to petition our government in the First Amendment, what good is it if the doors are all closed and you can't communicate with any of them?
My sense is that there's been this real shift online with all, this expectation of activism, this expectation of engagement. And I think you're documenting here a real shift in the way that voter contact is embraced by elected officials. I started talking about that in Activism Inc., which was written many years ago now, and it just has progressed, exponentially. And more recently, because of the pandemic, I think we see it even more, where there's much less real face-to-face contact happening. And the question is, is our democracy designed to be able to endure without face-to-face contact and real engagement? And that's why that distinction between, mobilizing for short-term instrumental goals is so different from organizing, which involves real relational contact between individuals. And that organizing can be with elected officials or be with friends and neighbors in your community, of course.
You do a lot of surveys and interviews, and in this situation, there's a lot of self-censorship. I mean, these old-line citizen groups that were so responsible for the environmental legislation, for winning Supreme Court decisions, for consumer protection, to create EPA, OSHA, make sure some of the regulations actually save lives. They don't want to admit that they can't connect with these friends in Congress. When the Democrats won Congress big time with Obama in January 2009, I suggested to these groups to make a list of congressional hearings, because under George W. Bush, Republicans, they don't do congressional hearings that represent public interest. So there's a big backlog. And they gave the friends in the Senate, House, which was overwhelmingly Democratic at that time, a list, and very few hearings on consumer protection or environment or corporate crime or overseeing the military-industrial complex or the Interior Department or agriculture. Very few were scheduled. So this is a very serious problem, and they don't want to admit it, because then they're like telling their members back home or the press that they're powerless. Mm-hmm. And that is a vicious circle that's debilitating them. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had about this, and they don't want to admit it publicly. I even sent a letter to over 30 citizen groups pointing out how the media has excluded these groups, which they once publicized. Sid Wolf's Health Research Group used to be constantly on TV and in the newspapers. And, the media has a sensitive antenna. If they see that these groups don't have power on Capitol Hill, they don't have a backing, they can't generate hearings, they say, why should we cover them? They turn them into, indifferent think tanks. So this is a very serious problem in terms of petitioning our government, because nothing can happen without communication. Nothing can happen without a responsive regulatory agencies, senators, representatives. That's why we're starting a Congress Club, and it's not going to get underway until 100 people fill out an application and then urge their senators and representatives to respond to 2 detailed letters, like, what are you doing on the corporate crime wave, senator, representative, and what are you supporting for tax reform on the super wealthy and the global corporations who are escaping like never before their tax-paying responsibilities, especially when that money is needed for all the material and human infrastructure that the Biden administration is trying to get through Congress. So we look to the social scientists, Dana, for some help here. And, over the years, the political scientists have not been that helpful. The anthropologists, contrary to my sister's urging, are not studying up. They're still studying tribal cultures or local cultures instead of also studying the hierarchical power structure, like corporate structures and corporate supremacy. Where do we go here? How do you get social scientists to become more strategically helpful here?
Well, Ralph, I noticed you didn't mention sociologists, and I happen to be a sociologist.
I'll leave that to you.
But I would actually say that, there has been this real balkanization among the social sciences, where there's this expectation that if you're talking about politics, you only talk to political scientists. Well, I'm a sociologist. I work right at the intersection here, but I'm a sociologist who says, don't count us out, because there are a number of folks in sociology who are trying to shine light in these dark corners in the ways that you're talking about and recognize how important it is. And unfortunately, if we go back to the ways that those of us in sociology, for example, get used as sources for the media, if you think about the ways that we're brought in to give congressional testimony when there are hearings, et cetera, it tends to be that there's this balkanization and we don't get considered as much. I mean, that said, I think that has been changing, but I just thought it would be worth highlighting here that there are many people in sociology, not just myself, who do a lot of this work thinking about the underbelly here of the political system and how to reform it in a way that actually engages citizens and empowers them to participate in the action of democracy.
You make a good point. I mean, I've said again and again, we're living in a golden age of muckraking studies, even very powerful footnoted muckraking academic exposés. We're living in an age of muckraking documentaries. It doesn't go to the next stage. They're being ignored enormously by the decision makers in Washington and Wall Street. And so we need, I suppose, from our side to ask questions like, okay, we have this problem of non-responsiveness by members of Congress. Help us out, psychologists. Help us out, sociologists. Help us out, political scientists. It's a very pointed question. How do we break through the corporate curtain and their politically indentured representatives on Capitol Hill? Because again and again, it's the Congress people, 535 people who can turn around a majority or a supermajority, who can turn around the government and turn around the priorities of the country. And we're millions of people back home, and millions of them are progressive. So it's taking the next step beyond documenting the understanding of what's going on. Your comment.
Well, I would just say that I 100% agree with you, Ralph. And I think that this goes to this point that I was making before about the difference between mobilizing citizens and or academics, in this case, social scientists, to express their opinions rather than organizing for consistent social change. And it's different. Mobilizing is just, do this one thing, write a letter, right? Come out for a protest. But to make real social change, as I know you know, and you've documented it so many different ways over your career, it involves long-term engagement and involvement. And I think that social scientists like myself try very hard to figure out how to identify these points where we can engage and use our research for good. And so this is a great opportunity to think about how to do that better.
Well, it also requires a higher expectation level and demand by the existing citizen community, local, national, state. They've had their expectation levels driven down by years of Bush and, corporate Democrats dominating the political scene, squeezing out initiatory third parties with new agendas and ideas. And I would hope that some of these citizen groups would make access to the courts, access to the Justice Department, access to members of Congress, access to state and local legislatures, a major issue itself, apart from any substantive reform that's being proposed, a major issue. And they've got to do it, even though it might raise questions about burning some of their sources. They're afraid to, push the progressives in Congress because they got a little contacts here and there on old line issues that they're pursuing, and they've inhibited themselves. I just had a conversation with Senator Ed Markey, and I said, Senator Markey, we talked about 5-6 weeks ago about putting a statement regarding the decline of the Congress vis-a-vis the executive branch and the judiciary. Congress has turned itself into a gridlocked ink blot, and they've willingly given up so many of their authorities under the Constitution, like the Declare War Clause, and they let Trump trample the Constitution. And Democrat presidents also disregarded congressional authorities. They started wars all over the world, or armed incursions, as they're called, among other things. And I said, would you put this statement by Bruce Fein in the congressional record, restoring congressional sovereignty? And he said, done. So we went to John Walsh, his chief of staff, and others. They haven't done it still. So I called him more recently. I said, Ed, we go back to 1976 when he was elected. He became a fearless critic of nuclear power and pro-environment and all the rest. I said, what's going on here? You said done, and they didn't seem to hear it. What are they, running their own show? And you can't get these people to respond, the staff. Not just his staff, but a lot of staff. So I'm really emphasizing this because without access, you can say goodbye to democracy. You can say goodbye to civic engagement. All the things that we've worked for go down the drain if you're up against a stone wall around federal, state, and local governments. David?
Can you tell me more about the consultant class and how they get a percentage of the TV ad buys and how they're incentivized to spend money, even though, as you said, TV advertising doesn't work? Do we know what David Axelrod makes and what James Carville made? Aren't we entitled to know what they're making when they take on a candidate?
Ralph, you want to take this one?
Actually, we didn't discuss that. The role of consultants is enormous, especially on the Democratic Party. Elizabeth Moynihan, who throughout the consultants took over her husband's senatorial reelection campaign, told me they're a menace to the party because, first of all, they spend a lot of their time with corporate clients between elections, so they're conflicted. And second, when their candidate that they're supporting loses, they always blame the candidate. They never blame their own tactics and strategy. As David just said, pouring money into TV instead of the ground game. What can you say about these consultants? Has there been any research on this?
There's quite a bit of research on consultants and the way that consultants basically build power by laying what we call astroturf rather than engaging in real grassroots engagement and activism on the ground in communities. What I can say about it is that the more the left relies on consultants rather than relying on actual citizens in communities, the less opportunity there is for real citizens and everyday folks to get involved and have power in politics. And that's a real problem. Citizens need to take back the power. And one of the ways to do that is to think through the ways these elections work and the ways that citizens are being empowered within elections, because right now it's very much an instrumental expectation for citizens to do specific things around elections. You write a check, you maybe make a couple phone calls, you might write a letter, you might come out for a photo op holding a banner. But besides that, you leave it to the consultants. And that's not the way politics was originally designed. And that's not really what democracy looks like.
Next, Steve and David have questions for truck safety expert Jennifer Tierney.
Where are the Teamsters in all this?
Well, the Teamsters, we have items with them that we agree with and then some that we don't. So, depending on what the issue is, it goes, back and forth. And, another one of the big issues that, we're looking at that we're really concerned about is them reducing the age for drivers. They're thinking, the thought is 18 years old. And that's another scary thought. And, because the industry says that they need drivers, they want to lower this age, but the reason they need drivers is because the working conditions are so difficult and the pay is not good, and that's why they need drivers, not that they need to start pulling children out of high school to drive these trucks. And so the Teamsters vary from issue to issue on these positions. I mean, sometimes we're on the same page. More often than not, we're not. But we do find areas where we feel like we all can work together, and we do try to work together. But certainly something like 18-year-olds driving these trucks, I mean, it's proven. Science has proven that the male brain does not fully develop until 25 years of age. So you want to put one of them in one of these box trucks in your neighborhood where your child's playing and walking the dog. It's a disaster. It's a disaster waiting to happen. And I'm begging and pleading with members of Congress to just think about their loved ones and that it could happen to them and make decisions to prevent it from happening to anybody else.
Where are they on driver hours time, where these trucking companies push these drivers to drive unconscionably long hours with just very few breaks?
Well, they support that because the bottom line is money. They push them to the nth degree to drive, and then they have exemptions. One of the craziest exemptions that I've ever heard of was depending on the commodity that they're hauling, they can get an exemption from hours of service. Well, if the government has determined that this is the number of hours they're going to let them drive, whether I agree with that number or not, once you determine that, Why does what you are hauling, can you get an exemption? Does that mean because you're hauling agriculture items that you're not going to get as sleepy as you get if you're hauling items for Walmart? That makes no sense. So they're making these decisions based on pressure from the industry and money that is donated by the industry, and they're not making these decisions based on the safest thing for the motoring public. And it's heartbreaking. And hours of service is one of the areas that we see crashes all the time. They are worked. They're like sweatshops on wheels is what you would compare it to.
And you fall asleep at the wheel. There's a woman who
Yes.
lost her 2 sons in Maine who started a group years ago. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Daphne and Steve Eisner. Yes.
That's right. Give her name again, please.
It was Daphne and Steve Eisner, and their son, along with 3 other teenagers, was killed because the truck driver, they had a flat tire. They had pulled off on the side of the road, and the truck driver fell asleep, and he ventured off the road, and he literally plowed over them and killed 4 young teenagers. And Daphne and Steve, who are some of the most courageous people I've ever met in my life, started PAT, which is Parents Against Tired Truckers. So hours of service is also a very contributing cause of these catastrophic crashes. And that's where with underride and driver fatigue causing crashes, both of those are issues that could be greatly resolved with automatic emergency braking. Because if the driver had that, the truck would have started stopping itself.
You know, people just don't have a sense of their power,
No.
Jennifer. You know, if 1 million people just picked up the phone and called their members of Congress, it would create an uproar in Congress. I mean, they wouldn't know what to do. They would be so
Absolutely.
impressed by people out there. And what does it take to pick up the phone and call 202-225-3121, 202-225-3121? That's the switchboard. Pick it up. It's just part of daily living is daily citizenship. You cannot have a democracy without daily citizenship. A few minutes here, a few minutes there, and multiplied by 1 million, 2, 3 million people, and you'll get Congress under your sway and not under the sway of the Trucking Association.
Exactly. Do it now. Don't wait till it's somebody you love or somebody you know. Do it now.
And the bill number is?
HR 3684 and S 2016. There's a lot of really good things in there that could make a monumental difference. And American lives matter every bit as much as EU lives matter. So why can we not make this happen? These are crashes that are life-changing and things that you never, ever get over. And the loss is catastrophic. And we didn't even, necessarily delve into the cost to society for these crashes, but it's billions of dollars that it costs society because these crashes are happening. And that affects every American because that's the cost to society. Do you really want to keep supplementing the incomes of the trucking industry and for the shippers and receivers? I don't think we do.
And now Ralph elaborates on one of his recent tweets.
Now, Ralph, just as we get into the home stretch here, you put out a tweet recently, and I'm going to read the tweet, and I want you to tell us what your overarching point here was. And here was the tweet from Ralph. It said, GOP crazed to restrict voter rights, overregulate voters, and intimidate precinct workers, while Democrats focus on restricting candidates' ballot access. Example, see vote in Nevada's legislature. Now, what point are you making there, Ralph?
Basically 2 points. One is that while what the Democrats say regarding the Republicans at the state level, suppressing voters, purging voters, harassing voters and precinct workers, and actually criminalizing and intimidating their volunteer activities at the precincts, the Democrats have not distinguished themselves on candidate access, candidate rights. And candidate rights are inextricable from voter rights because more candidates give more voices and choices, and they churn up the system, which is dominated by a two-party duopoly. The other point is the Democrats keep talking about voter suppression, which is true, but they got to personalize it more. They got to be able to talk in a few more words about overregulating voters, obstructing the critical participation in a democratic society, repealing the Constitution, building a bureaucracy of frivolous lawsuits by state governments against precinct workers who are volunteering their time during elections. They got to elaborate it that way. Instead, they have this sing-song voter suppression. It doesn't ring the way those phrases would ring.
And so, just like we were talking with Professor Fisher about organizing, its language is a part of that too, strong language.
Yeah, I mean, the level of outrage that the Republican legislators in Texas, Georgia, Florida have inflicted on all people in terms of regulating voters. Can you imagine that? Regulating voters, regulating all kinds of activities that are flowering in this country to get more people to vote. What they're doing is criminogenic. What they're doing, if they put the statutes out, should be reverse prosecution of any officials who try to deny people that critical constitutional right.
Well, very good. Thank you for that, Ralph.
Finally, Ralph answers your questions.
Let's do some listener questions. Dave, why don't you start us off with Dave Carlson?
This first question comes to us from Dave Carlson. Hi, Ralph. On this show, you indicated that it is illegal for government leaders to sell weapons for offensive purposes. What is the process for starting a criminal prosecution or other relevant action against our leaders who appear to be blatantly breaking this law? Thanks, Dave Carlson.
Well, the power to prosecute this, and you're right, it's constant violation of a federal statute by both Democrat and Republican administrations permitting weapons to be sold abroad, is the Justice Department. And because of this pernicious doctrine we've talked about, no standing to sue, the way the Supreme Court has interpreted it is that no person in this country can bring a government violator of this law to justice. They can't sue. They'd be thrown out of court. You don't have any standing to sue because you don't have a real specified interest. Hello? Don't have a specified interest in the rule of law being applied to government violators. So right now it's in the hands of the Justice Department. And if you want more information about this, the international law and constitutional expert, I'm sure, would respond to you. And you can reach Bruce Fine, who's been on this program many times. That's Bruce at finepoints.com.
I know we're out of time, but do you think America should be a signatory to the International Criminal Court?
Yeah, of course. If we want other violators and dictatorial rulers brought to justice, how can we have any credibility if our empire and its violations, like the criminal invasion of Iraq and the criminal undeclared war against Libya, which is leading to all kinds of deaths to this day, 10 years later, are not part of the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction?
All right. This next question comes from Vanessa Augier. And she says, Ralph, Steve, David, and Russell, I'm a regular listener of the show and was elated to listen to the recent show, The Power of Youth, featuring Calla Walsh from Massachusetts. Although I'm older than Calla, I too found success in the message she preaches. I'm a 28-year-old city councilor for Grants Pass, Oregon. Calla is right when she says getting involved in local politics has a profound impact in helping your community. For too long, I was fixated on federal politics and felt that from the West Coast, I was not moving the needle at all. I began focusing on my state house, but I lived 3 hours from the capital in rural Oregon. Once I began focusing on local politics, I was able to affect real change. In just 7 short months, there has been a rapid paradigm shift on the city council. I would like to encourage all civically engaged youth, focus local. Pay no attention to your job history, your education status, your social economic status, how you dress. None of that matters. Step into the ring and speak, even if your voice shakes. Hearing Calla and all of the work she has done and is doing fuels my fire to keep going. Thank you, Ralph and team, for all the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. I have just a person for you to connect with because he's done the same thing in Maui, the Hawaiian island. He toppled an entrenched city council representing commercial interests for over 100 years by grassroots organizing and electing people to the city council who constituted a majority. His name is Paul Delorier, and he's written a book called Reclaim Democracy. Step by step, you're going to really enjoy it. Go to his website. It's reclaimdemocracy.us. Reclaimdemocracy.us.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. David?
This next question comes to us from Jeff Norris. Hello, I'm a resident of rural Caswell County, a beautiful and nearly undisturbed by industry county, just outside the rapidly growing Piedmont Triad in North Carolina. For 2 years, the residents have been fighting to keep Sunrock, a family-owned business in Raleigh, from installing 2 separate facilities, which, when finished, would include a nearly 600-acre quarry that will be 500 feet deep and a total of 4 asphalt ready-mix plants. As you might imagine, the corporation has done everything in its power to try to fly under the radar and keep public interest at bay. There are signs of corruption on the county board of commissioners, and there's even been a complaint filed with the state board of elections for misdeeds. This is typical for larger corporations, but this took a quite nefarious turn when in April, the company decided to sue 52 county residents, mostly low income, in county court, demanding a jury trial in an attempt to get them to stop fighting for their rights as citizens. Obviously, this is an attempt at intimidation of regular folks. North Carolina Policy Watch has chronicled many of these activities. Could you please help to offer any guidance as to how to gain publicity so that the good citizens of Caswell County may continue to fight?
Well, Jeff, you seem to be describing what we know as slap suits. These are where real estate and other corporate interests, confronted by a rising citizen opposition, file a lawsuit to shut them up, intimidate them, make them pay legal fees. And the SLAP lawsuit, SLAP stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. And the way to counteract that is to file a counter SLAP suit against them. And you can get some information about this by contacting Charlene Lavoie, who is a community lawyer in Connecticut for a long time. She's done these counter SLAP suits. And just contact her at Charlene Lavoie, Lavoie, at AOL.com. That's Charlene Lavoie, Lavoie, at AOL.com. And she'll refer you to a center in Colorado that actually helps citizens in your kind of predicament who are confronted with these frivolous suits trying to deprive you of your First Amendment rights of free speech in the civic arena.
All right. Thank you for your questions.
And that's a wrap. Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour when we are joined by Dr. John Gaiman, who will answer your questions about healthcare. Until next time.
Stand up, you've been sitting way